pregnant woman was rejected at the bride market, until the knight said, "She's mine." Dust swirls through the market square. A church bell tolls. The crowd parts, and all eyes fall on a trembling young woman, her belly heavy with child. One by one, men sneer and turn away. Laughter cuts like a knife. No man will claim her. Just when despair is certain, iron-shod boots strike the cobblestones. A disgraced knight steps forward. His voice rings out, steady as steel. "She's mine," but whispers rise in the shadows. This knight carries his own shame, and powerful enemies wait to tear them apart. Behind closed doors, a spurned suitor plots, clutching a secret that could shatter her life forever. Now, honor and love are on trial before the whole town. Will a ruined woman and a fallen knight find redemption, or be crushed beneath scandal and betrayal? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The autumn wind whipped through the muddy square of Kent's Bride Market, carrying the mingled scents of fresh bread, livestock, and unwashed bodies. Eleanor Marsh stood among the line of hopeful women, her plain brown dress unable to hide the gentle swell of her condition. She kept her eyes downcast, one hand resting protectively over her belly, while the other clutched her worn shawl tighter. Against the chill dot around her, the market bustled with its usual activity. Farmers haggled over the price of wheat, and merchants called out their wares from wooden stalls. But it was the whispers that cut through the ordinary noise like knives, sharp and cruel. "The nerve of her," a woman in a baker's apron muttered, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. Coming to the bride market in her state, Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. 6 months ago, she had been a respected lady's maid, trusted with the finest silks and laces. Now, after Lord Edmund Fletcher's betrayal and her dismissal from service, she had nowhere else to turn. A group of potential suitors approached the line of women. They were mostly farmers and tradesmen, their clothes sturdy and practical. Each man walked slowly, assessing the women like prized cattle at auction. Eleanor felt their gazes slide over her and then sharpen with recognition. "Isn't that the Marsh girl?" one man whispered to another. "The one who—" "Aye," his companion answered with a sneer. "Thought herself too good for honest folk, and got herself ruined by her fancy lord." A prosperous-looking merchant in a fine wool coat stopped before her. His lip curled as he looked her up and down. "Damaged goods," he spat, barely missing her feet as he turned away. Eleanor's vision blurred with unshed tears. The memory of Lord Edmund's smooth words and false promises rose unbidden in her mind. How he had courted her in secret, speaking of marriage and a grand future together. How quickly he had abandoned her when she told him of the child, his cruel laughter echoing in the servants' hall as she was thrown out without references. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "Shame!" someone called out. "God have mercy on her soul," another voice added with false piety. Eleanor's hands trembled. She had known this was a desperate gamble, but she had hoped. What? That someone would see past her circumstance? That there might be one kind soul in all of Kent willing to give her and her unborn child a chance. Just as she gathered her skirts to flee the market and its judgment, a tall figure stepped forward from the crowd. The morning sun caught on his scarred face, casting deep shadows across the mark that ran from his left temple to jaw. Sir Roland Ashbury's presence seemed to fill the square, though he stood quietly, his military bearing evident in his straight spine and steady gaze. The crowd fell silent. Even those who had been jeering moments before lowered their eyes before the knight's weathered countenance. Eleanor had heard whispers about him too, the warrior who returned from foreign campaigns under a cloud of dishonor, though none dared speak the accusations to his face. Sir Roland's eyes met hers, and Eleanor found herself unable to look away. There was no judgment in his gaze, no cruel amusement or false pity. Instead, she saw something that made her heart stutter and her chest understanding, and perhaps a hint of the same loneliness she carried in her own heart. His voice, when it came, was clear and steady, cutting through the market's tense silence like a blade. "She is mine." The words hung in the air for a long moment before gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor stared at him, her lips parted in shock, her humiliation momentarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected declaration. The knight's scarred face remained impassive, but his eyes never left hers, holding her gaze as firmly as a physical touch. The market square erupted in shocked murmurs, but Eleanor barely heard them. In that moment, there was only Sir Rowland's unwavering gaze and the wild beating of her own heart, caught between disbelief and the first fragile stirring of hope. The crowd at the Bride Market began to disperse like autumn leaves scattered by wind, but their whispers lingered in the air like morning frost. Sir Rowland Ashbury stepped forward, his scarred face stern yet dignified, and offered his arm to Eleanor with the grace of his noble upbringing. "Allow me, Miss Marsh," he said softly, his voice carrying none of the mockery she had endured all morning. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she placed her hand on his offered arm. The gesture, so proper and genteel, felt foreign after months of scorn. As they walked away from the market square, the muttering followed them like persistent shadows. "Sir Rowland," Eleanor spoke once they were beyond the crowd's hearing, her voice tight with worry. "I cannot accept your generous offer. You do not understand the burden." "I understand more than you might think," Rowland interrupted gently, guiding her around a muddy patch in the road. The morning sun caught the silver streaks in his dark hair, earned more from battle than age. "The whispers that follow you through town, I hear them too, though of a different nature." They paused beneath an old oak tree, its leaves painting dappled shadows across their faces. Eleanor studied him properly for the first time, the proud set of his shoulders despite his worn clothing, the scar that ran from his left temple to jaw, the kindness in his eyes that belied his warriors. "Bearing. They call me coward," Rowland continued, his voice matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "Say I fled from battle and left my men to die. The truth matters little to those who prefer scandal to sense. I returned from the war to find my reputation in tatters and my place at court forfeit." Eleanor's hand tightened unconsciously on his arm. "But why would you bind yourself to more disgrace? Surely claiming she swallowed hard, "a ruined woman will only worsen your standing." "Perhaps," Rowland agreed, a slight smile softening his features. "But I have learned that true honor lies not in what others think of us, but in what we know to be right." As evening descended over the town, the local tavern buzzed with fresh gossip. Serving maids whispered behind their hands as they carried foaming mugs of ale, and merchants leaned close over their tables to share the day's most shocking news. "Did you hear?" they asked each other. "Sir Rowland, the disgraced knight, claimed that poor Marsh girl at the market today." "Aye, the one with child. Birds of a feather," some nodded sagely. "Disgrace finds disgrace." The tavern's warmth and chatter contrasted sharply with the cool efficiency of Steward Fletcher's study, where a messenger received a sealed decree with explicit instructions. The man hurried through the darkening streets to Rowland's modest cottage. On the town's outskirts, where firelight glowed in the windows inside, Eleanor sat in a warm but clean chair, her hands folded in her lap as Rowland broke the seal on the decree. The single candle on the table cast long shadows across the room's simple furnishings: a shelf of books, a sword mounted on the wall, a few pieces of sturdy furniture. Rowland's face grew grave as he read the document aloud. "By order of the county magistrate, any claim made at the Bride Market must be supported by proof of sufficient land holdings or noble patronage within 14 days. Else it shall be declared null and void." The candle flame flickered as Eleanor drew in a sharp breath. 14 days, she whispered, one hand moving protectively to her belly. What can be done in so short a time? Roland carefully set the decree on the table, his war-roughened hands gentle with the paper. 2 weeks, he said quietly, to secure both our futures. The candlelight caught the determination in his eyes as he looked at Eleanor, showing the warrior spirit that had carried him through countless battles. They sat in silence as the gravity of their situation settled around them like a heavy cloak. Outside, an owl called into the gathering night, its cry a lonely echo of their own uncertainty. The first light of dawn crept through the cracks of Roland's weathered cottage, casting thin golden beams across Eleanor's face. She stirred from her makeshift bed near the hearth, where Roland had insisted she rest while he took the humble cot in the corner. The musty scent of rain-soaked wood filled her nose, and above her head, the pitter-patter of tiny feet marked the passage of mice along the ancient rafters. Eleanor sat up slowly, one hand instinctively cradling her swollen belly. Droplets of water fell steadily from 3 separate spots in the ceiling, each landing with a quiet splash in the metal pots Roland had positioned the night before. The cottage, though sturdy enough to stand, showed clear signs of neglect that tugged at it. Her heart, outside, the creak of the well's wooden handle drew her attention. Through the window, she could see Roland already at work, his broad shoulders straining as he drew water. His movements were careful, measured, as though each motion caused him discomfort. Eleanor knew enough of war wounds to recognize the way. He favored his left side. She rose and dressed quickly, making her way outside to help. "Sir Roland, please, allow me," she called softly, reaching for the bucket. "Miss Marsh, in your condition," he began to protest. But Eleanor had already taken hold of the rope. "I am with child, not made of glass," she said, managing a small smile. "And I've drawn water since I was tall enough to reach the handle." Roland yielded with a respectful nod, turning instead to a battered set of armor laid out on a wooden table beneath the cottage's overhang. Eleanor watched as he picked up a cloth and began to scrub at the rust marking the breastplate, his movements revealing both care and frustration. Inside, Eleanor set to work with practiced efficiency. She swept the packed dirt floor, arranged Roland's few possessions, and prepared a simple breakfast of porridge and the last of yesterday's bread. Her hands kept busy, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of household tasks. Through the window, she could still see Roland struggling with his armor, his scarred face set in concentration dot as she worked. He occasionally glanced her way, his expression thoughtful. "You remind me of the nurses," he said suddenly, breaking the morning quiet. "In the field hospitals, they had that same quiet strength about them. Saved my life, they did, when others had given me up for dead." Eleanor paused in her sweeping, touched by the comparison. "They sound like brave women." They were. He turned back to his armor, but not before Eleanor caught the shadow of memory crossing his face. Sunday arrived with the tolling of church bells. Eleanor smoothed her worn dress, the best she owned, and walked beside Roland toward the village church. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. As they approached the church steps, the crowd of villagers parted like water around stones, their whispers following in Eleanor's wake. Inside the church, Eleanor automatically moved toward the back pews, where servants and laborers traditionally sat. Roland's hand on her arm stopped her. "You'll sit with me," he said firmly, loud enough for nearby parishioners to hear. Though some turned away in disapproval, others lowered their eyes, chastened by the quiet authority in his voice. Throughout the service, Eleanor felt the weight of stares upon her. She kept her eyes forward, her hands folded protectively over her belly, drawing strength from Roland's steady presence beside her. The priest's sermon seemed to linger overlong on the themes of sin and redemption as the congregation filed out after the final prayer. The clip-clop of hooves and the rattle of wooden wheels announced an approaching carriage. The vehicle, polished and proud, drew to a halt before the church steps. Eleanor's heart seemed to freeze in her chest as Lord Edmund Fletcher stepped down, his boots gleaming, his clothing speaking of wealth and influence. His eyes found Eleanor immediately, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Miss Marsh," he said, sweeping into an elaborate bow that made mockery of the gesture. "How fortunate to find you here, in God's house no less." His gaze flickered to her middle, then to Roland, standing rigid beside her. "Fear not, my dear. I shall see all matters settled quite soon." The color drained from Eleanor's face as Lord Edmund's words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. The evening shadows lengthened across the cottage floor as Roland paced back and forth, his heavy boots wearing a path in the weathered wooden planks. Eleanor sat quietly by the hearth, her fingers tracing the edges of a small wooden box she had kept hidden beneath her shawl since arriving. The firelight caught the warm brass clasp, dulled by years of careful handling. "What troubles you so?" Roland asked, pausing his restless movement to study her face. Eleanor drew a deep breath, steadying herself. "There is something you must see, Sir Roland." She opened the box with trembling fingers, revealing a collection of aged papers, carefully preserved despite their yellowed edges. From among them, she withdrew a crumpled document, its red wax seal still intact, though cracked with age. Roland knelt beside her chair, his scarred face illuminated by the dancing flames. "A deed?" "My father's estate," Eleanor whispered, smoothing the parchment with careful fingers. "Ashworth Manor, not grand, but enough for a modest living. 20 acres of good land with a small orchard." Her voice caught. "All lost to the Fletchers through false claims and corrupted ledgers." Roland's eyes narrowed as he studied the document. "Lord Edmund's family. They cheated your father?" Eleanor nodded, one hand protectively cradling her swollen belly. "His father was steward to the county magistrate. The books were altered, loans invented, interest compounded upon interest until—" She blinked back tears. "Until nothing remained but debts we could never hope to repay." "By heaven's grace, Roland," exclaimed, rising to his feet. "This could be our salvation. With these papers, we could petition the magistrate. Prove the Fletcher family's deceit. No." Eleanor clutched the deed to her chest. "Edmund holds too much influence with the courts. His gold has purchased many friends among the justices." She looked up at Roland, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It would be our word against his, and who would believe a ruined woman and a disgraced knight?" Roland's jaw tightened, but he could not deny the truth of her words. After a long moment, he spoke quietly. "Then I shall seek help elsewhere. I rode with good men in the war, men who knew my heart and saw my actions with their own eyes. There, testimony could restore my name, and with it, my right to claim lands and title." Eleanor watched as he moved to the corner where his armor hung, running his fingers over the dulled metal. "You mean to ride out?" "At first light," he confirmed. "There are 3 who served with me in the Northern campaign. If I ride hard, I can reach them all within a week's time." "A week?" Eleanor's voice quavered. "But the decree from the steward gave us only a fortnight to prove your claim." Roland turned to her, his expression gentle but determined. "Then I shall have to ride very hard indeed." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching as Roland secured his sword and what little coin he possessed. "The cottage will be well tended in your absence," she promised, though her heart ached at the thought of being alone. "Bar the door at night," Roland instructed, checking the girth of his saddle one final time. "And trust no one who comes calling." He hesitated, then reached out to squeeze her hand briefly. "I will return as swiftly as I can." Eleanor watched until horse and rider disappeared around the bend in the road, then turned to face the empty cottage. The day passed slowly as she swept floors, mended linens, and tried not to count the hours until Roland's return. As darkness fell, she moved through the cottage, closing each shutter against the growing cold. At the last window, she paused, gazing out at the tree line that bordered Roland's modest property. "Keep him safe," she whispered, offering up a quiet prayer to heaven. But her prayer was not the only thing carried on the evening air. In the shadows of the trees, two figures crouched low, watching the cottage with predatory patience. Edmund's men settled in for their vigil, their master's coins heavy in their purses, and his instructions clear in their minds. 2 days passed like an eternity before Eleanor heard the familiar clip-clop of hooves approaching the cottage gate. Her heart leaped at the sound, and she hurried outside despite the evening chill. There stood Roland, dismounting wearily from his horse, his travel-worn cloak dusty from the road. Yet his eyes shone with triumph as he patted the leather satchel at his side. "Sir Roland!" Eleanor called out, unable to contain her relief. She rushed to meet him, forgetting propriety in her joy at his safe return. Her hands fluttered anxiously, wanting to help but unsure how. "My lady," Roland said softly, a tired smile warming his scarred features, "I bring good news." He reached into his satchel and carefully withdrew several sealed letters. "My old brothers-in-arms remember truth, if the nobles do not. They have written their testimony of my conduct in battle." Eleanor helped him stable his horse, insisting he rest while she prepared a simple supper of bread and stew. The cottage seemed warmer somehow with his return, as if his presence drove back the shadows that had gathered during his absence. The next morning found them settling into an unexpected domesticity. Eleanor sat by the window, making neat stitches in Roland's worn tunic while sunlight streamed through the clouded glass. Her skilled fingers worked swiftly, mending the frayed edges with care. "You need not trouble yourself," Roland protested, though his eyes softened at her consideration. "Nonsense," Eleanor replied, not looking up from her work. "A knight cannot defend anyone's honor in a ragged tunic." When a wave of morning sickness struck Eleanor, Roland surprised her by heading straight to the garden. He returned with fresh mint leaves and ginger root, steeping them in hot water, just as his mother had once done for his sisters. "This should ease your discomfort," he said, offering her the steaming cup. The tender gesture brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Their shared laughter began tentatively at first, a quiet chuckle over Roland's clumsy attempts at cooking, a gentle jest about Eleanor's determination to organize his bachelor's chaos. Soon, their mirth grew bolder, echoing off the cottage walls and driving away the gloom that had so long resided there. At the market that afternoon, Eleanor kept her head high despite the familiar whispers. She selected vegetables with careful dignity, pretending not to hear the cutting remarks about her condition. But when the butcher's wife loudly called her a fallen woman, Roland stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "You speak of what?" "You do not understand, madam," he said, meeting the woman's gaze steadily. "This lady has shown more grace in her trials than many who stand in judgment." His words, spoken without heat but with unmistakable conviction, caused several onlookers to lower their eyes in shame. To Eleanor's surprise, the baker's daughter offered her a fresh roll, and the herb woman pressed a bundle of healing plants into her hands. Small kindnesses, perhaps, but they felt like the first drops of rain after a long drought. That evening, Eleanor sat mending by the fire while Roland cleaned his sword, the familiar routine bringing comfort to them both. She found herself imagining future evenings like this, peaceful, shared, a true home at last. The thought both thrilled and frightened her, for she had learned how quickly dreams could shatter. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as Roland set aside his weapon. He moved to sit beside her chair, his movements hesitant, yet determined. For a moment, he simply watched the firelight play across her features. Then, slowly, as if approaching a nervous fawn, he reached out and placed his calloused hand upon her swollen belly. "I shall be father to this child," he promised quietly, his voice rough with emotion. The simple declaration held more weight than any flowery vow. Eleanor's vision blurred as tears spilled down her cheeks. She covered his hand with her own, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. In that moment, the cottage truly became a home, warmed not just by the hearth fire, but by the promise of a future she had thought forever lost to her. The magistrate's hall loomed before them, its stone walls seeping winter's chill despite the burning braziers. Eleanor clutched the wooden box containing her father's papers close to her chest as she and Roland entered. The gathered nobles and stewards turned to stare, their whispers echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Roland guided Eleanor forward with a gentle hand at her elbow. His other hand rested on the leather satchel containing the soldiers' testimonies. The magistrate, a thin man with graying temples, peered down at them from his raised wooden bench. "Present your case," he commanded, his voice carrying through the drafty chamber. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she opened the box. "My lord, I have here the deed to Marsh Haven, signed and sealed by my late father." She lifted the crumpled parchment, its red wax seal still intact. "It shows our rightful claim to the land before." Her voice faltered. Roland stepped forward. "My lord, I also bring testimonies from fellow soldiers who served with me in His Majesty's campaigns. They speak to my character and valor in battle." The magistrate reached for the documents, but before his fingers could touch them, the heavy oak doors burst open. Lord Edmund Fletcher strode in, his fine boots clicking against the stone floor. A cruel smile played at his lips. "My lords, I must object," Edmund's voice rang out. "That woman stands here claimed by another, but she is, in truth, my betrothed." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. "And the child she carries is my rightful heir." Eleanor swayed on her feet, one hand pressed to her belly. "That's not true," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the growing murmurs. Edmund produced the document with a flourish. "I have here sworn statements from good folk who witnessed our betrothal." He nodded to 3 men who stepped forward from the shadows, and more testimonies regarding Sir Roland's conduct in battle. The first witness, a weather-beaten man in merchant's clothes, spoke with rehearsed precision. "I saw it with my own eyes, my lord. Sir Roland abandoned his command when the enemy charged. Left his men to die while he fled." "Lies!" Roland's face flushed with anger. These men were nowhere near that battle. But 2 more witnesses stepped forward, each telling similar tales. Eleanor watched in horror as Roland's face grew pale with rage and despair. She could smell the coin purses that had bought such convenient memories. The magistrate raised his hand for silence. "This matter has grown too complex for my court alone. It must be tried before Lord Pembroke himself." He gestured to the guards. "Take Sir Roland for questioning. His claims of valor must be examined thoroughly." Eleanor's vision began to blur as 2 guards seized Roland's arms. "No," she breathed, reaching for him. The room spun around her, the faces of the crowd melting together. Her knees buckled and darkness claimed her. When she opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a settee in an unfamiliar chamber. Heavy tapestries covered the walls, and a fire crackled in the hearth. But any comfort fled as she saw Lord Edmund standing over her, his shadow falling across her face. "My dear Eleanor," he said, his voice as cold as frost. "How fortunate that you're now safe in my father's household, where you belong." He reached down to brush a strand of hair from her face, and she flinched away. "I will never belong to you," she whispered. Edmund's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You don't understand. You have no choice in this matter." He straightened, adjusting his fine coat sleeves. "That child you carry, my child, will be raised as my heir, with or without your consent." The choice is merely whether you wish to make this easy or difficult for yourself. Eleanor curled protectively around her swollen belly, tears sliding down her cheeks as Edmund's cold laughter filled the room. Through the window, she could see the last rays of sunlight fading, and with them, her hopes of escape. The cold stone walls of the town hall's underground cell pressed in around Roland like a tomb. Rusty chains clinked as he shifted on the damp straw, each movement bringing fresh pain from the iron shackles. Moonlight filtered through a narrow window high above, casting strange shadows that danced like specters of his past in the darkness. Memories of war crashed over him like waves. The clash of steel, the screams of dying men, the choking smoke of burning villages, all these haunted his thoughts. But now, a new fear gripped his heart. The thought of Eleanor alone and unprotected in Edmund's grasp, miles away. In the oppressive grandeur of Edmund's manor house, Eleanor paced her confined chambers. Heavy curtains blocked most of the candlelight, and a guard's shadow moved steadily past her door every quarter hour. The fine furnishings, silk cushions, and polished wood felt more like a prison than luxury. Her hand rested protectively over her swollen belly as she gazed out the window at the distant church spire. "Miss?" A whispered voice made Eleanor turn. Mary, a young maid with kind eyes, slipped through the door carrying fresh linens. Hidden beneath the cloth, Eleanor spotted a bundle wrapped in a napkin. "Bless you, Mary," Eleanor whispered quickly, tucking away the bread and cheese. "Have you heard any news?" The maid glanced nervously at the door. "They've set the trial for 3 days hence, miss. Lord Edmund has brought in witnesses from London, paid them well, they say." She lowered her voice further. "Sir Roland! They mean to break him with false testimony about the war." Eleanor's hands trembled as she sank into a chair. 3 days. Just 3 days to save both Roland and herself from Edmund's schemes. "Mary, I need paper and ink. Can you manage it?" The maid nodded, patting her apron pocket. "Already done, miss. Borrowed it from the housekeeper's desk." Working by candlelight, Eleanor poured her heart onto the page. Her letter to the church rector spoke of Edmund's deceit, of Roland's true valor, of the corrupt dealings that had stolen her father's land. Tears splashed onto the paper as she wrote of her unborn child and the danger they all faced. "Most Reverend Father," she wrote, her script shaking but determined, "I beseech you to hear the truth of this matter. Sir Roland Ashbury stands accused of crimes he never committed, while the true villain walks free in your congregation. For the sake of justice and Christian mercy, I pray you will speak at his trial." Mary returned an hour later with Eleanor's prayer book, its leather cover worn soft with use. Together, they carefully folded the letter and tucked it between the pages of Psalms. The maid clutched the book to her chest, promising to deliver it to the rectory before dawn prayers as midnight approached. Eleanor knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in desperate prayer. The church bells began their solemn count, each deep tone echoing across the sleeping town. 1.2.3. The sound wrapped around her like a shroud as she whispered ancient prayers for protection and guidance. "Dear Lord," she breathed, "give us strength for what lies ahead. Protect Roland in his cell. Guard this innocent child beneath my heart, and let truth prevail against all falsehood." The final bell tolled, its resonance fading into the night. Eleanor remained kneeling, her prayers continuing in silence as somewhere in the darkness. Mary hurried through empty streets with a prayer book clutched tight, and Roland kept his lonely vigil in his cell, all of them waiting for the dawn that would bring them 3 days closer to judgment. In her chamber, Eleanor finally rose from her prayers, her knees aching from the hard floor. She moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. The church spire stood black against the star-filled sky, its cross a silent witness to her vigil. As midnight slipped into the early hours, she watched and waited, knowing that with the sunrise would begin the countdown to a trial that would determine not just Roland's fate, but the future of all she held dear. Morning sunlight streamed through the great hall's stained glass windows, casting jeweled patterns across the worn flagstones. The assembled townsfolk shuffled and whispered as guards led Eleanor to the wooden gallery overlooking the court. Her face was pale but composed, her hands clasped protectively over her belly. Below, Roland stood in chains before the magistrate's raised bench, his scarred face stoic despite the weight of accusation heavy in the air. The steward Fletcher rose from his seat, his silver-trimmed coat gleaming as he gestured toward Roland. "My lord magistrate, this man stands accused of grave deceptions. Not only did he abandon his post in battle, fleeing like a common coward, but he now seeks to claim land through forged documents and false testimony." Lord Edmund stepped forward. Next, his polished boots clicking against the stone floor. "Furthermore, he has taken advantage of an innocent woman's desperate circumstances." His voice dripped with false concern as he gazed up at Eleanor. "Miss Marsh was promised to me before. This charlatan interfered." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eleanor watched faces turn toward her, some pitying, others scornful. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she refused to look away. "The accused may speak in his defense," the magistrate announced, his lined face stern beneath his powdered wig. Roland lifted his chin, chains rattling. "I have served king and country with honor. I claim no land that is not rightfully connected to Miss Marsh's inheritance, and I—" "Lies," Edmund interrupted. "We have witnesses who saw him flee the battlefield at Dunkirk. The very seal on these supposed deeds is suspect." Before Roland could respond, Eleanor found herself moving. Her feet carried her down the gallery stairs of their own accord, past the startled guards and into the center of the hall. "My lords, I must speak." The magistrate frowned. "This is most irregular. Women do not typically address the court. And yet I must." Eleanor's voice rang clear in the sudden hush. "Sir Roland is no deceiver. When all others scorned me, he offered protection with honor. He tends my needs with gentle hands, fetches herbs for my morning sickness, and vows to love this child as his own." Her hand pressed against her belly. "It was Lord Edmund who deceived me with false promises, who cast me aside when I carried his child, who now seeks to claim both land and heir through treachery." Gasps echoed through the hall. Edmund's face darkened with rage, but Eleanor continued, strength flowing through her like a river. "Sir Roland's scars were earned defending others. His honor shines in every quiet deed of kindness. If there is deception here, look to those who deal in bribes and threats, not to a man who risks all to protect a woman scorned by society." The steward surged to his feet. "This emotional display changes nothing. We have documented proof of cowardice." Witnesses to the heavy oak doors creaked open, cutting off his words. All heads turned as an aged nobleman strode into the hall, his military bearing unmistakable despite his years. Commander Sir Thomas Brandt's boots struck the flagstones with authority as he approached the magistrate's bench, a leather document, case tucked under one arm. "My lord magistrate," the commander's voice filled the hall, "I bring sealed orders from His Majesty's own War Office." He withdrew several documents bearing red wax seals. These detail Sir Roland Ashbury's heroic defense of the King's Standard at Dunkirk, where he held the line against overwhelming odds while others retreated. His actions saved countless lives, though the wound he took nearly claimed his own. The commander turned, fixing Edmund with a steely gaze. "I have also brought testimony from soldiers who witnessed these events, men of honor who cannot be bought with coin or threats." The magistrate leaned forward, examining the royal seals with care. Eleanor's heart soared as she watched Roland stand straighter, pride returning to his bearing as his former commander's words washed away years of shame. Commander Sir Thomas, Brandt's voice rang out clear and strong through the great hall, the sealed papers rustling in his weathered hands. On the 15th day of August, in the year of our Lord 1673, Lieutenant Roland Ashbury, with but 20 men at his command, held the bridge of St. Michael against over 100 enemy soldiers. Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. The commander's eyes blazed with pride as he continued. For 6 hours, they defended that narrow crossing, allowing our wounded to retreat to safety. When his men's arrows were spent, Lieutenant Ashbury himself stood at the bridge's center, sword in hand, challenging any who dared to cross. The townsfolk who had moments ago scorned Roland now leaned forward, hanging on every word. Even the magistrate set aside his quill, transfixed by the tale of valor. By his actions that day, Lieutenant Ashbury saved not dozens, but hundreds of lives. I myself witnessed his courage, as did every man who survived that retreat. The commanders? Gaze swept the hall. These are the king's own orders, bearing his seal, commending Roland Ashbury for extraordinary bravery in service to the crown. Eleanor's heart swelled with pride as she watched Roland stand taller, his chains seeming lighter now as truth dispelled lies. But Commander Brandt was not finished. From his coat, he withdrew another document, its edges crisp despite its age. Furthermore, I have here the original land registry, showing the true boundaries of the Marsh estate. He laid it beside Eleanor's father's deed. As the king's appointed surveyor of these lands, I can confirm these documents match precisely. The steward's altered records are nothing but forgeries. Steward Fletcher's face turned ashen. Lord Edmonds. Fingers curled into fists at his sides as the commander methodically exposed years of corruption. The evidence was undeniable. The stolen acres, the falsified documents, the systematic theft that had ruined Eleanor's family. The magistrate's face darkened with each revelation. "This is a most grievous matter," he declared, rising from his seat. "By the authority vested in me, I hereby strip the Fletcher estate of all falsely claimed lands. The inheritance shall be restored to its rightful owner, Miss Eleanor Marsh, effective immediately." Lord Edmund's composure shattered. With a roar of rage, he lunged toward Eleanor, his carefully cultivated manners falling away to reveal the beast beneath. "You worthless witch! You've ruined everything." Eleanor stumbled backward, but Roland moved faster than seemed possible. With strength born of desperate need, he wrenched free of his chains, the rusted links snapping under sudden strain. In 2 bounds, he placed himself between Eleanor and her attacker, his war-scarred face fierce with protective fury. "You shall not touch her," Roland growled, his voice carrying the same authority that had once commanded men in battle. Guards rushed forward, seizing Lord Edmund's arms as he thrashed and cursed. "Unhand me! Do you know who I am? I am Lord Edmund." "Fletcher, you are nothing now," the magistrate declared coldly. "Take him away. He shall answer for his crimes, along with his father." The assembled crowd watched in stunned silence as the guards dragged the struggling nobleman from the hall, his fine clothes disheveled, his carefully maintained dignity in tatters. The steward, seeing his son taken away, seemed to age decades. In moments, he offered no resistance when another pair of guards stepped forward to escort him out. Eleanor's legs trembled as the tension that had sustained her finally ebbed. She swayed, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. Roland turned just in time to catch her in his arms, holding her close as she sagged against his chest. The same townsfolk who had shunned her at church now burst into spontaneous cheers. Their earlier disdain transformed into admiration as they witnessed justice prevail. Men who had mocked Roland now called out praise for his valor. Women who had whispered cruel gossip about Eleanor dabbed tears from their eyes at the sight of love triumphant. Through it all, Eleanor remained safe. In Roland's embrace, her face pressed against the rough fabric of his shirt. His heart beat strong and steady against her cheek, a rhythm that promised protection, honor, and most precious of all, a future filled with hope. The morning sun streamed through the church's stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the worn stone floor. For the third and final time, Father Alcott's voice rang clear through the hushed sanctuary. I published the banns of marriage between Sir Roland Ashbury of this parish and Miss Eleanor Marsh of the same. If any person knows cause or just impediment why these two persons should not be joined together in holy matrimony, ye are to declare it. The packed pews held their collective breath, but no objection came. The villagers who had once scorned Eleanor now sat in respectful silence, their curiosity and growing acceptance evident in their attentive faces. How different this day was from that muddy morning in the bride market mere months ago. Eleanor stood in the church vestry, smoothing the folds of her white linen gown. Though simple, the dress spoke of quiet elegance, its clean lines enhanced by delicate embroidery she had stitched herself during evening hours. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the small bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning as the organ began to play. Eleanor took her first steps down the ancient stone aisle. Sunlight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, arranged simply but beautifully beneath a lace veil. The child within her had grown, but she carried herself with grace and dignity. Her head held high. At the altar stood Roland, his war-scarred face transformed by joy. His armor gleamed in the morning light, polished to mirror brightness for this sacred day. No longer did he bear the weight of false accusations. His honor had been restored, his valor recognized. But it was not pride that brought the light to his eyes as he watched Eleanor approach. It was love. Father Alcott smiled warmly as he joined their hands together. Roland's rough fingers closed gently around Eleanor's smaller ones as they faced each other before God and witnesses. The priest's words filled the hushed church. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. When the moment came for vows, Roland's voice carried clear and strong through the church. I, Roland, take thee, Eleanor, to be my wedded wife. I pledge not only my love and fidelity, but my sacred oath as protector and father to the child thou carriest. What God has blessed, I shall cherish. Tears glistened in Eleanor's eyes as she made her own vows, her voice soft but steady. The simple gold rings were exchanged, blessed, and placed upon their fingers, symbols of a love that had overcome scandal and society's scorn. As they turned to face their neighbors as man and wife, the church bells began to peal joyously. The same villagers who had once hurled insults now stood, offering smiles and blessings. Even the most hardened hearts had been softened by witnessing love's triumph over adversity. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of gold as Roland and Eleanor walked hand in hand through the swaying grass of their restored fields. The land that had been stolen from her family was now renewed under their care, promising a future of prosperity and peace. Eleanor paused, drawing Roland's hand to rest against her rounded belly. The child stirs, she whispered, her eyes bright with wonder, as if blessing this day. Roland's scarred face softened with tenderness as he felt the movement beneath his palm. Together, they gazed upon their cottage in the distance. No longer was it the crumbling shelter of outcasts. Repairs and care had transformed it into a true home. Warm lamplight already glowed in its windows, welcoming them to their new life together as the sun set in magnificent colors behind it. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.